everybody. It's Justine Case of American Newscape, rejoining our friend Scott Dudley for American Consciousness. Hello, Scott. Welcome back to American Newscape.
Hey, Justin. Hey, listeners. How's everybody today? How are you doing, Justin?
I'm hanging in there, a little overwhelmed, but that's kind of the cost of doing business at times, so I'm not begrudging it.
Yeah, as a retiree, I'm officially now underwhelmed.
Well, I don't give you very long to be retired, Scott. You'll be pretty soon. You'll be having a full plate once again.
Well, I'll be honest. I stay plenty busy. I just don't have to do it to pay the bills anymore, and that's kind of what I like.
Oh,
It
very
gives me a
good.
lot more power over my choices.
Very good. So, Scott, what have you got for us this week?
So here's kind of the way this has been developing, and if you guys are like doing us like a Netflix serial thing and kind of binge listening,
Binging us.
we,
Okay.
we did a show on Shine, right? And it led to kind of, you know what, love is really the key to being your shiniest self. So we did a show on love. And when we did the show on love, a lot of the feedback, one of the biggest things that came out of that was, you know, I can love better. I can love more completely. I can love more openly and honestly and really bring that out if I feel safe. So I want to talk about safety in this, and I'll be honest. The co-production element of the show, where I go talk to everybody I know, basically. I only know 8 people, but I talk to all of them. And I say, hey, so safety, what comes up for you guys? And I have been just floored. It is such a complex thing. It's like I feel like it's a big plate of spaghetti, right? And each strand of spaghetti is all tied up and it's all interwoven. And so today, Justin, I'm going to start at one end of the plate. You're going to start at the other end of the plate. And if we meet in the middle, I get to be tramp. This, we'll talk about switching some other week, but I call dibs.
Okay. You got it. You got it, Scott.
But because that's what I've seen. I mean, I got stuff like I got the driver's ed manual read to me about safety, because to that person, when you said safety, it was like the road, driving, keeping my license as I become older and get more challenged. And that was their thing. So I think, listeners, let's just take a second here and say this. When I say safety, what pops in your head? Because that's going to be a good guidepost in terms of how you reflect and how you think about safety as we go through all of these topics. And because we'll touch on as many as we can. And maybe that's part of the perspective, is understanding that we all have different kind of responses to something as broad as love, or as broad as shining, or as broad as safety. So driver's ed manual, that's what you think about, right, Justin?
No, I don't think about that. I don't. You know, I maybe I'm unique, but I really don't. I don't race to a place of safety because I'm kind of a person that believes I can handle what happens. I do a
So you so you're safe because you have the confidence and the belief and the surety of experience, probably, that if something does happen, you'll figure out how to deal with it.
or I won't, but I'm not going to. Yeah, exactly. You know, that's the beauty of ageism. You've been through a lot. You've seen a lot of water under the bridge, and you're better capable of handling what's gonna happen. But safety for a lot of people is an important place, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in the house that they live in, whether the roof is not going to leak. There's so many components to it, and I think everybody has to find a place where they can harness as much good feelings about safety as possible.
And which is a challenge sometimes. Some of the sexual assault prevention came up.
Yeah.
A couple of people really dialed into safety. For me, is knowing that I'm not going to get attacked by some guy. I don't know. Immortal youth. What do you think of it? You know how immortal youth are, right?
How are
They're,
we?
they're not worried about safety because it's never going to affect them, ever.
Well, yeah, but we can be young at heart and still recognize the fact that we may not be saved. But I like that term, and I've never heard it. Immortal youth. That must be a
Immortal, you know, there's a time when you're growing up that you feel bulletproof, right?
right.
That you're just doing what you do, and the guardian angels are I've got your back.
Well, yeah, but parenting can have something to do with that too. And but yeah, there's a long period of time, and I probably uh, still find myself there most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got you again. You've got the. It's funny because I would say one of the biggest problems about being creative, and I score pretty high in creativity. If you didn't already know that,
Trust you.
is is I've got an awful imagination.
Yeah.
My imagination can dream up incredible risk potentials that are never ever going to happen. And part of my growing up, part of my aging, has been taking that imagination a little bit less seriously. You know, because it could run me around. It could get me like a herd dog in a flock of sheep. I'd be like, whoa, that one, this one, that one, this one, all day long. And I had to figure that out. That I was overreacting to imagined potential.
Well, I was fortunate. When I was probably two or three, there were mountain lions in the closet. I was dreaming of King Kong coming to get me or Godzilla coming to get me. And the way my mother approached that was, oh, that's interesting. And then by the time I was three, I told my mom I wasn't worried anymore. She goes, why's that? I go, because I recognize my dreams. And if Godzilla is creating a problem, I just whoop him. So here's this 3-year old looking forward to dreaming about Godzilla and King Kong because that will have something to challenge me in my sleep. But I was never afraid with it anymore. And it has to be parenting.
You had that foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a recurring dream that the devil was chasing me, and it was pretty intensely horrifying. Right? It was like visceral fear of death, and and I was probably about 4 or 5. And ultimately, I did not kick the devil's butt. What I did was I was able to kind of step back within the dream and imagine it playing on television, and then turn the channel.
Oh, that's interesting.
And and when I did that, that the whole thing solved itself. And the devil never bothered me again because it's like, well, I got a way to manage this.
Yeah, yeah, your subconscious knew that it was of no point to torment you. How old were you when that happened, Scott?
I was about 4 or 5, but I was also the first child ever born into Generation X. So the TV and I were really close growing up. You know, I was the TV generation with working parents, and we only had 3 channels. We had aluminum foil over rabbit ears. But by the time I was a teenager, we had cable, and so I got a lot of my foundational stuff from TV.
Well, and the difference is I got most of my foundational stuff from outdoors.
Nice.
We played even when I was 3 and 4. My best friend at that time, we played all over the neighborhood. It was a time when you didn't have to worry about your kids. They could play in the neighborhood. There were a lot of kids around. And I grew up into that. And as I kept getting older, it was sports, it was athletics, it was outside. When we moved to Phoenix, I didn't recognize that it was hot because I had too much stuff to do.
Nice. Yeah, it didn't slow you down, did it?
No, no, it didn't. And, you know, the swimming pool may have slowed me down because now I had to add that to the things that I did outside. But, you know, it's a great topic, and what a gift we could give the world or people to help find their safe place if they don't have one. And there's wonderful organizations like Women Haven and things like that that are basically set up and designed to help those people with a safe place and a future. Because if you don't feel safe, you can't have any confidence in your future.
Right. And that's for obviously for a very specific slice because it's interrelational physical violence. They may go to some emotional neglect and stuff like that too. But that's and some people are really worried about that. I talked to a couple of children of alcoholic households, and one of the things that came up that was really interesting was the difference between a consistent angry drunk in the house versus an inconsistent one. And the inconsistent one was a lot scarier because you were never sure if dishes were going to be flying around the room. Whereas the person who did it every night, eventually you just were able to kind of anticipate it and guard against it. That was an interesting topic.
You talk about alcoholism. I grew up in a family where my parents were functioning alcoholics, but there wasn't any anger. They were of a generation, the greatest generation, where drinking was part of their social behavior, and they knew they either handled it or it was tempered. We all have known those people that drink too much that are angry, and then we know those people that drink too much that are pathetically in love with the world. Now they love us. Now we love their car. Now they love this and that. So, is that learned behavior? Is that genetic? It's hard to say.
Or just character. One of the best essays I ever read was written in the late 1400s, and it identified 6 different types of drunks. And so you had the angry drunk, you had the maudlin drunk, you had the dancing on the table drunk, you had the lecherous drunk, and it was, in reading it was like, wow, they had this figured out a long time ago.
Yeah, well, they had experience when they
Right.
when they were drinking grog in the caves, if that's what the cavemen called it. But mankind has always looked for that take me away aspect, whether it was an herb or whether it was alcohol or a mushroom. It's something that's part of human psyche, I guess.
It certainly is, and ultimately, if you go back to the medieval Europe, the water wasn't very good.
Yeah.
People would get sick. So of course, you were drinking, alcohol content stuff because it was antibacterial.
Well, that makes sense. At least they had an excuse.
Right. Well, that's an important part of alcoholism, isn't it? You need to have your excuses kind of lined up to cover you.
Yeah, I know, and I've always been fascinated by, we know people that are chemically adverse to it.
Dependent.
Yeah, well, or that it's poison to them, where they have to go get dried out. And, there are a lot of war vets that never drank until they went to war, and now we dump them into a horrific situation where they were using alcohol as a crutch, and not only was it getting them killed, but I think it was creating traumas that they were going to have to enhancing the traumas they were going to have to deal with when they came back home.
It's interesting in terms of safety because it really creates kind of a parallel analogy where you're trying to manage something, in this case maybe safety, and what you're managing it with works, but it has consequences that make it maladaptive. So like if you were worried about somebody following you and all you ever did was turn around and check, and you were walking into street signs and getting hit by cars and everything else that not looking forward would entail, that's a maladaptive consequence. It's like, yeah, your safety coping is keeping you safe, just like drinking kind of eases the pain. But in the long run, it's probably not the best strategy to cope with what you've decided is important enough to deal with.
Well, absolutely, and it's I find life a much more beautiful place if I am working without a net. And maybe that's reckless abandon, I don't know, but it's just a comfortable place to be for me.
As long as you've signed off on your life insurance policy and your family members are cool with the arrangement.
Well, they don't expect a lot from me, so it's good. It's good.
I mean, sometimes, we make fun of Luna and stuff, but sometimes I'll temper my behavior because I'm like, well, the cats are going to live 20 years, and if I'm gone, who the hell's going to love them?
We'll all love your cat, Scott.
I hope so. So I've got one. I'll throw one out to you. Let's
Good.
throw out some themes. How about this? Safety, fate versus evil intent. What are your thoughts on that? So some stuff
Whoa.
is natural, right? Like getting struck by lightning or an earthquake or whatever. That's fate. Evil intent is like somebody deliberately coming and targeting you.
Well,
Does
when
it
we
matter?
well, one of those we can't do anything about. I mean, we can somebody targeting us needs to be dealt with, whether it's via the authorities or you have to put yourself, people are something new these days. There's so much crime and violent crime. People are building panic rooms in their homes.
If I
When
was trapped in a panic room with Luna, my problem, the litter box would be my panic point.
well, when I grew up in Omaha, back when the tornado sirens were just all over the place, somebody saw a
Yeah, yeah,
cloud, so
yeah.
they set off a tornado siren. We didn't bother to go in the basement. So
We went over to the southwest porch so we could see it coming,
exactly,
right?
because you can hear it. You can hear it coming.
Yeah, and if you need to take action, you will. But so but evil exploitation is kind of weird because, like for me, I'm an older person. I get some pretty convincing scams, and it's probably going to get a lot worse if I manage to make it into the next decade or whatever. I can just imagine being tricked and fooled all the time by people who are trying to convince me that giving my account information or signing over my life insurance or whatever is the thing to do.
Or taking that part-time job. Now we're getting flooded with text messages from people we don't know
Yes, we are.
that pretend that they've misdialed a number, but they're so infatuated with us that they want to offer us jobs and this and that. And I find it, to me, it's comical. But you're right. For others, it could be life changing, life altering if they fall for that ploy.
My mom got a call that my oldest son was incarcerated and needed X amount of money to get out on bail, and it was so well staged. They had an imitation son voice that sounded just like him. And she fortunately she called me
Good.
because she couldn't get a hold of my son, so that kind of added to her urgency to just get this taken care of immediately. And I was like, you know what? He's a big boy. If he's in jail, let him rot.
Let him rot. There's that
And
compassion.
well, because I was just trying to dial her down, right? I was just trying to get her to take a deep breath and not react because that's the trick with scams like that. They want a sense of panic and urgency to get you to act immediately before you get a chance to think it out. And so whenever I ever get that sense that somebody's pushing me, like for instant stuff, then I get real oppositional. I'm like,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
and we're seeing scams for Amber Alerts because people have found a way to benefit from that. Now, Scott and I live miles from the border with Mexico, and U.S. citizen businessmen particularly are kidnapped on an occasion and taken into Mexico for ransom. Well, now those poor businessmen have to deal with their family believing they're being scammed.
yeah. The whole let him rot thing probably doesn't sit well with the kidnap freaked him out.
Yeah, yeah. So,
But that brings up a good point though, because it is very dramatic and the consequences are very serious. But the probability is 0.00001. I mean, I hate to be like really graphic and provocative. School shootings
yeah,
are awful. They're horrible. They're unimaginably bad. But they're also virtually they're virtually unheard of. So if you look at all the different schools in the entire United States that are in session right now, and nothing happened today, you're setting up an odds probability that's next to zero. So it is critical, and we do need to guard against it. We need some sort of safety protections. But if a kid can't learn or study because they're worried about it, that's not really realistic. And not very. It's back to maladaptive coping.
Well, I agree with you, and um, it's something that we didn't have to deal with as children. It just wasn't part of our society.
And I'll make sure to wear my I'm not a businessman disguise whenever I'm driving around Calexico. Okay?
Well, I would pity the kidnappers that thought I was a catch because I would be laughing. Really? You think somebody's got to pay to get me back? I don't think so.
Got 57 cents in my pocket. It's yours.
Yeah, yeah.
What about this angle? This is an interesting theme to me, and it came up a little bit. It's, do I have a legitimate fear, or is this a psyop by somebody who wants me to be scared? And this kind of leans into sometimes media or politics or stuff like that, because fear is a really good motivator for behavior. And so like the border collies, don't kill the sheep, but the sheep believe that they're being threatened and their lives are in danger, and that's why they behave so well. And so sometimes when I'm feeling worried about something, I'm like, wait a minute, am I being played? Is there somebody here who's trying to get me to behave or feel a certain way in order to influence my behavior?
Well, there's a huge culture of that, and it has rolled into media. They're not necessarily fueling the fire, but they're making money off of sensationalism.
If it
And
leads, it leads.
yeah, exactly. It's just like I noticed this when I was a kid because when the Mississippi River would flood and all those homes were destroyed, the media would show up and they would find Bubba. And Bubba would talk about the devastation and how he's lost everything and he'll have a tear in this corner of his eye. And they'll say, well, Bubba, what are you going to do now? Bubba said, and Bubba's always say, I'm going to rebuild. And every time the Mississippi River floods, I promise you, you will see Bubba, and Bubba's going to rebuild because that's the nature of that part of society. They know the river's going to flood, but the media has never told us that, they're well suited for this. It's kind of like if you live in Florida, every day could be hurricane day, and you need to adapt or move.
If you're the housing insurance industry, you've chosen to move. So
Well,
California's right behind them.
well, absolutely. My homeowners insurance, I got notified that they weren't going to rewrite because of wildfires, and there's not a tree within, you
Yes,
know.
Holtville?
Yeah.
Or are we talking?
Well, yeah, the alfalfa field went up, or yeah, it was ludicrous. I had to appeal it, and of course they accepted it. But everybody in California is at the jeopardy of losing their homeowners insurance, which means that their mortgages can become due and payable,
Yeah, yeah.
and nobody's really, they're giving it lip service, but they're not doing anything about it. So that would be something I would be a little concerned about, and it's totally out of my control.
It's a safety issue.
Yeah,
It's an interesting safety issue.
yeah, yeah. So,
Anytime there was a wildfire, my mom from Michigan would call and she'd say, "Are you guys okay?" And I'd start with, "Mom, California's a really big state." And then I follow that up with, "And we are surrounded by dirt in this community, and dirt don't burn."
well, and it's like when the Easter quake hit our little area of the world, and it was 7.2 magnitude or whatever, and I was about 30 miles from the mega center. I got called from Red Cross people all over the country that knew me asking if I was okay. My family wasn't concerned. We had power back, and we had water, and we had potable water and power and phones. So the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and our area was capable of making that happen because we've had three of the biggest earthquakes in North American history, all within 30 miles of where we live.
And I was Bubba, like 15 minutes after the quake, I was like, well, I got a crap ton of stuff to clean up. So let me start cleaning. Let me start with the broken glass.
Yeah, but Scott, that the way people handle it, let's talk about traumatic fear or safety. When I went outside to make sure that there was no damage to any of the neighbors' houses, I saw my neighbors in shock walking up and down the street. So I was trying to gather them and get them to sit down and relax and we're okay until they came out of it. It was not a traumatic shock from injury, but it was like PTSD.
It violated their safety. They had
Yeah.
a deep visceral fear of being buried in an earthquake, and that earthquake was big, and it was close enough to happening that people had to deal with that existential dread.
Yeah.
That's a big safety thing.
Well, and it is, and we are well suited to handle it, but we have them all the time. We get earthquake storms like it's Tuesday. We're going to have an earthquake storm somewhere in the county today because we're in a seismic area. I mean, an
Yeah,
extremely seismic area.
yeah,
But
yes, we are.
while people are worrying about earthquakes, I'm more concerned about the volcano because we have thermal ground like nobody's imagined. We have mud that's just bubbling out of the ground because the magma has heated it up. But it's another thing if you want to stop and think about all the risks. It just doesn't make life worth living.
Well, exactly, and that's kind of the point of safety is how much do you need to get in. How much do you want to put on the table to bet in terms of your attention, in terms of your the money you spend on extra stuff, versus how much do you want to relax and let the universe take care of itself with the confidence that if something pops, you'll deal with it the best you can, and you can't control everything, so some things you'll just have to accept.
Well, exactly. Now, do you have much of an earthquake kick yourself?
I don't. I came from tornado. I actually saw Kalamazoo get destroyed by an F3 tornado when I was in college, and I had seen a couple of other tornadoes take out the towns I grew up in, and that was pretty cool. I mean, earthquake summer after we had that 7.2, every time there was a 5 point something aftershock, I did kind of get kind of a gravelly kind of oh here we go again feeling, but it was never kind of existential dread. I was never like, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Right.
It was like, oh crap, I hope stuff doesn't fall over again.
Well, and I hear from people from the East Coast, and they ask me, how do you handle that? I said, oh, it's just, it's Tuesday. It's just another Tuesday. What I couldn't handle is watching a tornado, or I mean a hurricane, head my way. Am I going to evacuate? Am I going to get the family out of here? How much preparation am I going to do? I would not feel easy about that.
Those are really interesting, and ultimately, we live in Hurricane Alley on the West Coast. This would be the area. If there is going to be a hurricane that impacts the West Coast of the United States, it will be ours.
Oh, I agree.
It'll sneak up the Gulf of California in that hot water, and it'll go fast enough that it doesn't fall apart, and it'll slam into us. And we've seen some tropical storms do that. And you're right. That's especially because climate's a little bit less predictable than it used to be. There's some odds now. There's some probabilities going on.
Well, there are, and there's some bad stats out there. I remember doing some work for an ag client of mine in the state was very concerned about how that operation could handle stormwater, and they had what was called the 100-year flood. And I looked at the numbers, and trying to accommodate these people, and I'm always asking them where they got their education. But I said, well, do you believe the 100-year flood is a 2-inch rain episode? Because what will take the valley out, our valley, is a hurricane will come up the Baja, straight up the Baja, up the Cortez, Sea of Cortez, and it will dump 7 or 8 inches of water into an area that can't handle half an inch of water.
We will all be in the Salton Sea.
Yeah, we'll all be very salty. And it's going to happen. We just don't know when. We do know that a huge tidal wave is going to hit Seattle because that's what
Oh
that
yeah,
area.
I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a three-way fault, a T-shaped fault, and it wipes out that coastline every, half of 10,000, 20,000 years.
No, I think it's more often than that, Scott. I think the last time I saw it was something like every 3 to 400 years. So how comfortably could I sleep in Seattle while I'm drinking my overpriced coffee? I don't know. I don't know.
Keeping your eye on Mount St. Helens and probably even Yellowstone.
Well, and my lady was up there during Mount St. Helens. She was in that area. And then she was living in Northridge when the Northridge quake hit. And then she came here with me, and lo and behold, Easter quake. I think it's her.
But see how easy it is to lose it? I mean, we're just taking one little slice, natural disasters.
Yeah.
And we're building something that occupies a lot of our CPU. We could walk away from this conversation going, I really probably should get some water and build that little trash can of safety supplies and whatever else. And that's one of those decisions people have to make. How much do you want to invest in trying to control the universe in ways that may or may not make you feel more safe, but more importantly, may or may not make you actually more safe?
Well, absolutely. Now, if you find comfort in doing that, do it. But the reality is, you're not going to be able to prepare for what you need to.
Yeah, no, in some circumstances, absolutely not.
It's.
So I've got another theme before we go
Okay.
off the earthquake thing, because those are interesting. I got to admit, and hurricanes I love.
Because you don't like Florida.
Relative vulnerability. Some people are more vulnerable to safety concerns than others. Children is a really good example. Women in some respects. The disabled community. Poor people. Immigrants. There are groups of people who have to run a gauntlet that you or I don't really have to run,
Absolutely.
because we're big and mean and old and grouchy. What are your thoughts on safety and vulnerable populations?
Well, I think they all have to be. They all have to be respected, and you're right, Scott. They all deal with different issues. Is their cardboard box strong enough to put up with the storm that's coming because they're homeless? And I can't imagine, homeless people are very vulnerable. And it's just like the incarcerated. If you're in a maximum security prison, you have a whole bunch of safety issues that none of us can relate to.
Well, and if it really hits the fan, all the people in charge of that facility are going to go be safe,
Yeah.
and they're probably not going to leave you the keys.
No, absolutely. But does that make them more resourceful? Probably does. It probably
Probably.
does. Probably does. And there's probably comfort in the camaraderie of the others that are in the same situation. But the immigrants, traveling through countries without the financial resources, dealing with things that we can't imagine. I remember when somebody pointed out a rape tree to me. And for people that don't know what a rape tree is, it's been described to me as immigrants coming over in a group, and at some stopping point, a lot of the women are raped. A lot of those single mothers are being raped, and then they have to go on about their business. That's something I can't fathom or understand. But
And they can never tell their stories. The
right,
stories of people who had to follow that route for freedom or safety or citizenship or whatever, have secrets that they cannot tell.
absolutely, and they deal with fears that we can't imagine. And is that?
I got something.
Go ahead.
So related to those secrets that can't be told, interesting study, and I almost got the guy on my show back in the day. So they did it up at Cal State Davis, UC Davis, and there was this plant that if it got stepped on by cattle, it didn't have any spines. It was just a regular plant. If it got stepped on by cattle and survived, the next 4 generations of that plant had spines. And I think when you take that model and you look at us as humans, and you look at that person who may have gotten raped as part of their immigration journey, or people who have had to endure stuff like that, uh, you're going to be looking at people whose progeny, whose next generations may be really reactive, maybe have that kind of internalized fear, that over concentration on trying to stay safe. And for them, it's like there's no logical reason. So, you go talk to your therapist or whatever, and it's like, well, you don't know because grandma never even told you the story because she's never going to tell anybody. That's a thing, and it can be a real influencer in terms of how people behave.
Oh, absolutely. And, if we go back to the 50s, date rape was not an uncommon occurrence. Being molested by your boss in the workplace for a woman was something that she might have to deal with. At least one thing we can be proud of. We can sit here and say, society's going to hell in a handbasket. We've made a lot of progress in those areas.
Yeah, I think that taking the safety needs of vulnerable populations seriously has been one thing that we've done fairly well in our society, in the United States society, and we've still got a ways to go. But I
Oh,
think the awareness.
no, absolutely. And maybe safer behavior. You
Here's
know
the
what?
theme:
Okay.
how much do you trust, and who do you trust relative to keeping yourself safe?
Very few. I trust people that have the capacity to keep me safe. I don't depend on others to keep me safe, but there are times that you need people around you to keep you safe from yourself.
So your car breaks down and you take it to a mechanic. Do you get a second opinion, or do you trust that guy?
I trust that guy because he treats me like family, or I wouldn't take it to him. Doesn't mean he actually treats me like family, but I don't want to worry about his integrity.
So that might be kind of a nice little standard here in terms of trust, is you trust people who present themselves to you as family, who give you that sense of being bonded and caring for you.
Well, absolutely, and that's a beauty of the Hispanic culture because they do treat their friends as family. They do invite you to dinner. They do check on you when you're not feeling well, and I've accepted that, and I like to have that circle of people around me that have that attitude. You
When I
know,
moved here 35 years ago from Michigan, and I'm a Norwegian Irish dude, who adopted me, who brought me into their homes, who fed me, who sheltered me, who kept me safe, who said, "Don't do this; it's going to be bad." It was the Hispanic community here. I really felt I didn't know what I brought that made them so naturally warm and caring. I didn't feel like I deserved it at times, and it's always been just a blessing.
well, maybe they saw you in a true light that you didn't even see yourself. We had a couple that kind of adopted us when we came here, and the wife and I were good friends, and the husband and I were good friends, but he didn't speak English very well, and I didn't speak Spanish very well. But we got along famously. We would laugh at our inability to communicate properly. And we hadn't been here very long, Scott, and we didn't know if we were going to stay. And they invited us over for the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl. And what they did was they drug a big screen TV out into the front yard, and they were making carne asada on the barbecues where we were, and there was beer or cerveza, and we were laughing and having a good time. And I remember leaning back and going and thinking, this is a good place. I mean, this is a good moment in time. And it was a wonderful experience for me.
Nice. So that sense of community is kind of a foundation of trust as well. What about, systems get hammered on a lot, right? I mean, it's like we can talk bad about government from now until the end of the time on YouTube, and we won't solve any problems, and B, we won't run out of topics. It is what it is. But the absence of systems would anarchy, chaos, would put a big dent in safety. Is that fair?
Well, absolutely. And it's some of the topics of what's going on. You know, there's dangerous people flooding into our country, and now we don't feel so safe about that being not controlled as best as possible. And there's some people that really worry about it, and there's some people that don't. But there are systems that we need, but there's also systems that we don't trust. I mean, systems that we find flawed, or the people involved in those systems are flawed. So there again, to me, it's part of society. Not. I imagine the first society in the caves. Three of the cavemen sat around talking about the caveman that was in charge, and they were talking about he wasn't right. He didn't have their best interest in heart. So I think human nature, as we gathered, that was an issue, and always would be.
Yeah, I find it kind of, I like things that are paradoxical, and this is a paradox. It's we are humans, and by humans we are inherently flawed, and then you put us together in a system, and those flaws can really be magnified sometimes. And regardless of what system you're looking at, whether it's education or whether it's mental health or law enforcement or social service, whatever system you're looking at, you get the best of times and worst of times things happening simultaneously without being able to kind of center yourself on the absence of these systems would be fatal for many people.
Oh, absolutely. And if we talk about heroic people and heroic careers, think about the fire jumpers that actually go into forest fires, risking their lives, and they love it. I mean, I have a good friend of mine's son is a fire jumper. He loves it. He gets up in the morning. That's why we find so many of these. Firemen are always suspects for setting fires because they love putting out fires.
There was a 4 alarm fire a few weeks ago in our community, and my wife said to me, "Wow, that must have been a really big and dangerous fire." I said, "No, Mom, it was Sunday morning. They haven't really had a big fire lately in our community, and so they all wanted to kind of get together and try out their skills." And it was like
That's exactly right.
everybody was bored sitting around the station, so they started texting their buddies, "Hey, add an extra alarm on this. We're ready to go."
Well, and it's like I live in a very small rural community that doesn't have a stoplight and has a rural fire or has a volunteer fire department, with a paid chief, and everybody else is volunteer. And people used to panic about something being on fire and calling the fire department. Well, their policy was to let it burn. Just let it burn itself out. Well, and maybe
Again, surrounded by dirt, you're not going to have a.
well, yeah, exactly. But and maybe that is cooler heads. Is it worth somebody risking their life to save a structure? I don't think so.
Do you have working smoke alarms in your house, sir?
No, I don't, because I don't have them. Nor a carbon monoxide alarm, but I don't have gas. So, no, I don't. And
Yeah, my mom was always sending me disciplinary memos on that one.
well, we have cats. We don't need smoke alarms.
Indeed, they are very sensitive to disruptions in their patterns of life, and they're pretty clear about letting you know that something's not going the way it's supposed to.
Well, last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was told there's coyotes outside. Okay.
Exactly. That's a good example.
Can we go back to sleep now? So, safety is important to all of us, and we all find our ways to cope. To be a beautiful, well, it would be a gift if we could do a show on giving people coping methods. Not giving them.
Sounds like next week's topic, Kurt. We
Yeah.
got this.
Well, we do, and I'll tell Justin, and he'll approve
Justin.
it. Well, and what was your consensus out of the dog park?
So I think at the end of the day, it was almost an equation. So for each of us in our lives, it's a math problem. How likely is any given thing to occur? anything that would threaten your safety, that you would have to take safety precautions about, how likely is it to occur? And then you have to kind of multiply the risk potential. If it happens, how bad is the consequence potentially? And then you kind of have to throw into your values. Is that important? Some people can walk away from their house. Some people are like, well, it was just stuff, I don't care. Other people are like, oh my God, that high school prom picture was my whole life and now it's burned. So different people have different value systems. And then there's an environmental context. How busy are you? How much time and effort do you have to dedicate to something that you think is important for your safety? Busy multitasking people tend to be a little bit less hung up on their safety just because they have no time.
You're right.
And so you ultimately have to decide, am I willing to commit this time to this thing that might be improbable, or the consequence isn't that high, or maybe I can just handle it, as you were suggesting earlier. And even if it did happen, and even if it was as bad as it could be, I could shrug and move on. And I think that's really when we all sat down and we said, we've got so many different areas of concern that if we had kind of a model we could apply to all of them, and that's where we got to. That's kind of what we ended up talking about.
Well, in the big test, we were all tested. When this pandemic came out, people were making decisions on giving up careers or taking vaccines that at best proved ineffective. Treatment process was not effective.
But I got enough vaccines that actually qualified for free pizza. So
Well, there you go.
there was that.
But everybody had to deal with that, and I did not judge anybody on their decisions that they were making. I did not elect to get the vaccine because I had never reacted well to flu vaccines in my history, and we knew it was unvetted. There were doctors telling us that this is unvetted, but we think it's really going to help. I think it saved a lot of people's life. I think it saved a lot of people's sanity, but I also believe from the other perspective, it created a lot of fear. And
yeah, that's a really good example.
and we got through it. We got through it, and now they've modified.
Well, we minus the 1.2 million people that died, but the rest of us, we're doing good.
Well, yeah, but that was mostly by the treatment process, and I think there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. And Scott, one of the funniest things when that was all going on was they were telling us that the flu didn't exist anymore. There was no flu. Well, the flu didn't go anywhere.
No, there's a brand new scary version coming out like right now.
Well, cool. And we got monkeypox, and we live in an area that has hantavirus, West Nile virus, encephalitis, and the mosquitoes, and
If desert fever gets in your lungs, we get that.
Oh yeah, and but when I moved to Phoenix when I was a little kid, they told if you live in these dust storms for a couple years, you're going to get it, and it may be really bad. But I would have to believe that that's modified too. That virus has evolved, so it's not the same virus that I grew up with.
No, that's how viruses survive, right?
Right.
Because they figure out that, because if they kill everybody, I mean, this is kind of off topic, but if they kill everybody, they're going to kill themselves. They have to have people or whatever they're going to live in to survive. And so they tend to, over time, be less fatal. And then we've seen that with COVID.
Yeah.
COVID hopped in, and COVID was chopping down all the people with secondary health problems, and we are not a very healthy society. And so if you had high blood pressure, if you were diabetes, if you had other stuff going on, and you caught a good case of COVID, yeah, you were touch and go. That helicopter never stopped flying over my house. I live by the hospital, and it was constant for a year and a half, taking people to places where they had like higher levels of treatment.
Oh.
And so ultimately it came in, and it was what it was, and then it moderated over time, hopefully.
Right.
And so now it's just going to be, like a nasty flu instead of some death sentence.
Well, until something else comes around.
And I'm a COVID virgin, so I've got no idea what's going on.
Oh,
I think
well,
it's because I have cats.
well, I had a lung resection in my late 20s, and since then, I was told that my immune system was compromised and I would probably have pneumonia from time to time. And I do. I
Yeah,
get
your Bob Marley days were done.
well, yeah, they were never much anyway, but and I did. About every 3 years I would get walking pneumonia. Well, when I got COVID, it was like walking pneumonia, and I treated it the same way I dealt with the pneumonia. A lot of people would panic, and it's just something that I've learned to cope with and deal with. And I feel for society because I know it created a lot of anxiety. And you
Yes,
in your professional career, weren't you at the command center for some of that?
I dove into emergency services, so I was like, they needed a mental health rep, and I went in and said, I'm doing outreach and training, and we can't do any of that stuff anymore. Go ahead, I'll be your guy. And as we sorted through this, and there was a lot of sorting through because there was a lot that wasn't known, and there was instant decisions coming down from government levels, and so there was a lot of stuff going on all over the place. And I had a 97-year-old mother-in-law at home.
Yeah.
So I'm going and sitting in a room with people every single day, and we're all first responders. So do you think any of us wear masks? No. We,
No.
we had the youth immunity thing going on. We were going to be immortal. And in fact, we didn't lose anyone, so kind of proved itself to be true. However, I had a 97-year-old mother-in-law at home that I was kind of worried about because I didn't want to bring it home and give it to her. And so ultimately, but it was exciting. It was dangerous. There was a lot of good things we could do for the community. About 6 months in, I was talking to the deputy chief saying, could I be a firefighter? Am I too old to get through firefighter school? Because I love what you guys do. It is so invigorating and so kind of, it's pure heroism. It's just it's a sacrificial bravery type of heroism. And I was super impressed with it.
It's just like, and you were there to help the first responders. If we're talking about fire, police, and all those other people, because they were having to deal with these emotional issues too.
That ended up being my role. It was
Yeah.
like, it's like, I'm going to walk in and do something silly because everybody's getting kind of ground down. And I mean, we were looking for refrigerated trucks to store bodies. It was not pretty. And so at the end of the day, I had to kind of be that person who could help support mental health, even though my mental health wasn't like always top shelf either. We were all going through the struggles. You know what's cool? My youngest kid, who went through the pandemic up at Santa Cruz, studying poli-sci, took a gap year after graduating in 3 years, and then texted me one day and said, I just enrolled in Eastern Oregon University. I want to be a firefighter. I was like,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
No more poli-sci. Give that stuff up.
Well, I wish him a fulfilling life and a safe life because that is a noble cause.
Yeah. You got to be. I was like, because I checked into it for my own training purposes. Like, you've got to take a 150-pound person up a ladder and down a ladder. Are you up for that? You're gonna have to start doing some push-ups.
Well, Scott, give us a couple tools before we get out of here to just temper.
Okay, so I think the tool is this. You really got to determine what you value, and then look at it critically. How likely is this to happen? How bad are the results? And do you have any control over the outcome? So like if you're freaked out about earthquakes, okay, get your extra batteries and a couple of gallons of clean water and stuff like that. But you're not going to be able to stop an earthquake.
No.
So if you're getting up all day worrying about an earthquake, that's probably not a very effective use of your mental energy. And I think so. I think if you use that equation, you come up with peaceful resolution to how you want to spend your energy. And maybe there are some things you can help prevent. Maybe there are some ways to stay safe. And then I would say this. be really careful of people selling you fear. If you haven't witnessed it, if you haven't experienced it, and somebody somewhere is saying, "Oh my God, watch out for this, watch out for that," it's like, just take a deep breath and say, "Well, do you have an agendized reason for me to feel scared?" And if you can feel that, then that's probably a red flag.
Well, I agree with you, Scott. And I would first gift I would give people, and you've given us hacks on your phone, is I would turn off emergency notifications on your cell phone.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And ultimately, I stay off of media. I listen to maybe a 5-minute general news update every day, and if I'm still alive and the house is still here and my family's still here, and news isn't saying that it's not going to be here in 5 minutes, then I'm okay. And whatever else is going on in the world that could incite fear, could incite drama, could incite anything else, it may be worth considering, but it's probably not worth me getting emotionally drained over. I can
Absolutely.
save myself for better stuff.
Well, absolutely. Because if you are emotionally drained, you're not in a good place to handle it when it happens.
All right. So, Justin, next week, adaptive coping methods. And I'll go out and I'll talk to my co production teams and say, hey, what works for you? What helps you feel better? What gets you to where you want to get? How do you meet your goals? How do you choose your goals? Whatever they've got, we'll put together and make an interesting show out of it.
All right. Very good, Scott. I appreciate the effort, and I apologize for all the side roads I took you down, but I think this was a worthy topic. Maybe we'll come
And
back to
and,
it.
and we didn't end up sucking on the same piece of spaghetti. So the lady and tramp thing, we dodged a bullet there.
Well, thank goodness, because I would not feel safe in that scenario. All right, everybody. Hey, this has been Justin Case and Scott bringing you American Consciousness. Thanks for joining us. Remember, additional information and links are provided in this video's read more. Today's the day to subscribe to this channel. Please learn more about Scott when time permits.